Coming up next on KPBS Evening Edition, we follow your tax dollar and tell you why so much of it ended up in the hands of redevelopment agencies in the first place.
And any idea what the word Humblebrag means? Linguist and radio host Grant Barrett will be here to explain and tell us more about his list of words for 2011. KPBS Evening Edition starts now.
Hello, thanks for joining us. I'm Joanne Ferrian.
And I'm Peggy Pico in for Dwayne Brown. San Diego Chargers president Dean Spanos has decided to keep coach Norv Turner and general manager A.J. Smith, despite the team missing the playoffs for a second straight season, and with fan discontent. Spanos made his decision today, 2 days after the Chargers finished 8-8, beating Oakland to keep the Raiders out of the playoffs.
Someone tried to set a San Diego worship hall on fire early this morning. It's the third time it's happened in 2 weeks. After the first fire, a chain-link fence was set up around the Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses off Adams Avenue in University Heights. Fire officials say a man wearing a mask was seen running from the hall this morning. They found gasoline and matches, plus some letters from a sign outside the building torn down, but no fire. There's a reward for information leading to an arrest.
A federal judge has blocked the state from cutting Medi-Cal payments to pharmacists and hospitals. KPBS health reporter Kenny Goldberg is following the story, and he joins me to explain. Kenny, last year, state lawmakers cut Medi-Cal payments to providers by 10% to help balance the budget. How did health providers react?
Well, they didn't like it at all, and they immediately filed lawsuits. Pharmacists and hospitals filed separate lawsuits challenging the Medi-Cal cuts, saying they're already getting some of the lowest rates in the country, and to cut them even further would reduce access to patients.
And what was the judge's ruling?
The judge agreed with that argument. She said although she realizes the state's in a financial bind, cutting Medi-Cal payments would do some irreparable harm to Medi-Cal patients, so she issued a temporary injunction.
And that's not the only challenge the state is facing on this.
That's right. Doctors from the California Medical Association, they also challenged the cuts. And that case is expected to be heard later this month.
And so far, how has the state responded?
The state disagrees with the judge's ruling. The state's going to ask the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals to reverse the injunction.
And when should we expect to know more on that and how that's going to work out?
Appeals should be filed pretty quickly. As to when the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals will hear the case, that we don't know yet.
Okay, we'll wait to hear on that. Kenny Goldberg, KPBS health reporter, thanks so much.
Thank you.
California's public university students have seen tuition increase dramatically in recent years. Even so, UC San Diego was ranked as one of the top 10 best values in higher education. KPBS education reporter Kyla Calvert joins us from the News Center with more. Kyla, who's doing these rankings and how well did UCSD do?
UCSD came in at number 10 in Kiplinger Magazine's rankings of the 100 best values in public colleges and universities. And Kiplinger looked at total cost plus what students pay after financial aid is factored in. They also looked at how competitive the admissions process is, retention and graduation rates at the schools, student to faculty ratios, and how much debt students had when they left school. And UC Berkeley and UCLA also made the top 10.
Well, we know tuition at the UCs has increased dramatically in the last few years. How is it specifically that they're still considered a good deal?
Well, I talked to Ann Klein, who oversees financial aid at UC San Diego, and she said that as the tuition costs have gone up, so has financial aid. And so this year, about 65% of the undergraduates at UCSD are getting need-based financial aid. And according to Kiplinger, after that need-based financial aid is factored in, students are paying about $10,000 instead of the full cost of $26,000. But you know, the school's competitiveness does play a large role because nationally the average cost for public universities this year is about $17,000, and the UCs are far ahead of that.
Alrighty, Kyla Calvert, KPBS education reporter, thank you. Police have released few details about the 4 people found dead early Sunday morning in a Coronado condo. 3 of the victims have been identified by relatives as Navy pilots John Reeves and David Reese, and Karen Reese, who is the sister of David Reese. She was a volleyball coach and worked at Trader Joe's in San Diego. The name of the other dead man, a 31-year-old Chula Vista resident, has not been released.
A high surf advisory began this morning through tomorrow afternoon for San Diego County. This video is from Ocean Beach Pier this afternoon. The National Weather Service expects breakers up to 10 feet. The high surf may cause minor flooding of low-lying areas and some erosion, especially during high tide. Forecasters say another long period west swell is expected Thursday night, bringing another round of high surf through Saturday.
Police arrested a prisoner who stole a fire engine to escape from Donovan State Prison in Otay Mesa. Thomas Kelly, who worked as a prison firefighter, was captured this morning in an East County neighborhood. He was serving time for a car theft conviction. Kelly had been scheduled for release in December 2013.
Gas prices have gone up again for the 13th time in just 2 weeks. The average price per gallon of regular gasoline in San Diego County is $3.66, up by half a cent from yesterday. The average gallon is nearly 12 cents more than it was 2 weeks ago.
It turns out that sexual satisfaction among women has something in common with fine wine. Both improve with age. That's the conclusion of a 40-year study by UCSD researchers of 800 women living in a San Diego retirement community. The study was published in January's edition of the American Journal of Medicine. And how much of your property tax dollars went to redevelopment agencies? Joanne and her guest have the answer as they follow the money at the KPBS Evening Edition Roundtable.
Last week, a California Supreme Court decision put an end to redevelopment agencies. The ruling upheld Governor Jerry Brown's decision to dissolve the agencies, transferring nearly $2 billion of property tax revenues from redevelopment back to local schools. San Diego Mayor Jerry Sanders called the move a money grab for the state. Well, today we want to look a little closer at that statement. In a moment, we'll speak with the political scientist, but first, take a look at how your property taxes are distributed here in San Diego County. Because remember, all property taxes collected here stay here. About 43% of all the property taxes collected in San Diego County went to schools last year, 21% to the county, and about 20% to cities. And now look at this. Redevelopment agencies got about 11% of the property tax pie. Special water and fire districts get about 3%, libraries less than 1%. Joining me to explain why this pie is so relevant is Vladimir Kogan, UCSD doctoral candidate and co-author of the book Paradise Plundered, a look at San Diego politics over the last few decades. Vlad, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about why is it redevelopment agencies were able to carve out 11% of this property tax pie?
Sure. Well, when we talk about redevelopment agencies, what we're really talking about is local cities, and redevelopment agencies are just separate accounts that they control. And so after Prop 13 passed in 1978, which was a major overhaul of property taxation in the state, cities had to share their property taxes with counties and schools. But there's this loophole called redevelopment, and it allowed cities, by creating these redevelopment agencies, to capture the full property taxes, to not have to share them with the schools or with the county. And so over time, it became a very popular way to increase local revenues by creating these separate redevelopment agencies and capturing these property taxes that would have gone to other government agencies here in the county.
We see with the pie, with schools getting about 43%, redevelopment agencies are dissolved. The Supreme Court decision upholds that. It would seem like a windfall for schools. They can just get now a bigger slice of the pie. Is that what's going to happen?
Not necessarily. So the way we in California designed our school system over the last 2 decades is that really the state is on the hook to provide education funding when local property taxes fall short, which is why the state has such a big interest in redevelopment, because any dollar that goes to redevelopment is really a dollar that the state has to backfill to the schools. And really part of the impetus for the redevelopment compromise that led to the lawsuit was that the state was trying to get redevelopment agencies to give more of their property taxes to schools so that the state could actually contribute less to schools and use that money for other programs that it pays for: higher education, social services, health care for the poor. And so most likely scenario is that some of this new money is going to be offset by cuts from the state that would have otherwise gone to local schools.
Now, we interviewed a number of people last week and over the past several months about the decision to get rid of redevelopment agencies. And you'll hear just about every elected official, including Mayor Jerry Sanders, say this is a bad thing. We need redevelopment agencies. They create jobs. They revitalize neighborhoods. They help pay for these big projects, things like Petco Park. Do they have a point here? I mean, do
they absolutely have a point. Redevelopment has done a whole lot of good in the state. It certainly pays for affordable housing. But the reality is that it's a zero-sum game. There's only a limited amount of money that the state and local governments collect, and so any dollar that you're spending for redevelopment and the state is in turn backfilling is money that the state can't spend on other programs. So certainly redevelopment creates jobs, but state spending for universities, state spending on healthcare also creates jobs, and it's all about finding the right compromise, the right balance. You know, how much of a priority do we as a state want to make redevelopment relative to these other important programs that we fund? And the problem is that I think redevelopment backers and advocates have for a long time believed that their program was special and it should be protected from all cuts from the state. And partly because of actions they've taken, partly of constitutional amendments and protections they've written in, they've in many ways led to the worst possible outcome where redevelopment is an all or nothing thing. So either the state can contribute to redevelopment, what it has in the past, and cut everybody else, or it has to get rid of redevelopment altogether. And so I think the struggle going forward is going to be to find some way to find that compromise, to find a way to fund redevelopment, to fund the things that it does without having the other programs, education and healthcare and services for the disabled, suffer as a result.
We got some interesting email last week as a result of this decision, and I want to read here something from a longtime California resident, someone who lives in Coronado now. And as we know, Coronado, basically all land that isn't owned by the federal government is under a redevelopment agency. And he writes, "We have captured public funds which have enabled us to build a new city hall, police department, community center, high school, middle school, and elementary school. We are now in civic heaven. If our mayor and council had run on a slate of taxing us to build all this bling, they would have been laughed out of town in a week." Doesn't he sort of really get to the heart of the matter here by pointing out that by using redevelopment money, we don't have that sort of public debate with the taxpayer?
That's absolutely right. I think, as I mentioned, one reason why redevelopment is so popular at the local level is that it's another way to raise money by cities that doesn't require higher taxes. And I think the central problem is that it also hides some of the trade-offs that we're implicitly making. Because, again, in most cases, money that goes to redevelopment is money that comes out of the state because the state's on the hook to backfill school funding. So when we use redevelopment to build a new city hall in Coronado, when we use redevelopment to pay for a new baseball stadium in downtown San Diego, we're also making a decision that a baseball stadium is more important than healthcare, more important than all the other programs that the state funds. And by not making those trade-offs clear and by really hiding the consequences, redevelopment has really, I think, perverted and twisted some of our public policy priorities in the state.
So when Mayor Jerry Sanders says that really the state dissolving these agencies is just a money grab for them, is that an accurate statement?
It's absolutely not so. You know, if you look over the long arc of history, the reason why cities have the property taxes that they do is that after Prop 13, the state really stepped in and gave them a bailout. It said, you know, it used to be the case that local schools were funded primarily by property taxes. Now, after Prop 13, to avoid cuts to the city, to avoid cuts to the county, the state essentially gave them property taxes that used to go to schools and in turn decided to step in and fund schools out of its own pot. And what all these really efforts come down to is a part on the state to say, you know, this may have been a good decision in the 70s, but it's not one we can afford anymore. So we're going to take some of your property taxes that we gave you, we as a state decided to give you, and we're going to give it back to schools so that we as a state can free up money for other things that we want to do.
Vlad Kogan, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
If caught early enough, some forms of cancer can be eradicated from the human body. Sadly, that's not the case with a blood cancer known as myeloma. More about that disease coming up. Plus, we'll review new words and terms inspired by events and pop culture in 2011.
Tonight on KPBS, roar with laughter at the comic genius of Laurel and Hardy, the Three Stooges, the Marx Brothers, and Lucille Ball. It's Make 'em Laugh, the funny business of America. On Frontline at 10, the story of young Afghan farm girls caught up in the world's drug trade. It's Opium Brides. And at 11, from forest to factory to concert hall, the making of the famous Steinway. That's all tonight on KPBS.
Where can you learn the history and uncover the treasures of our region? Right here on KPBS. First, on Ken Kramer's About San Diego, discover the little-known stories behind the things and places in San Diego we see every day. Then on Crossing South, host Jorge Meraz explores Baja, Mexico, and gets to know the places frequented by the locals. Get to know the people, the food, and the customs of our neighbor to the south, only on Crossing South. Thursday starting at 8 on KPBS. KPBS Evening Edition is made possible by Joan and Erwin Jacobs, and by
Some types of cancer can be completely removed, leaving a person cured of the disease. But that's not the case with a blood cancer known as myeloma. KPBS health reporter Kenny Goldberg tells us the disease can be controlled, but not cured.
In 1999, when Pacific Beach resident Elliot Recht was 45 years old, he went to the doctor for a checkup. His doctor found a high level of protein in his blood and sent Recht to a specialist. Recht remembers what the specialist told him.
So he says, well, you can do a stem cell transplant or chemotherapy. And I'm going, what are you talking about? And he said, you don't know this, do you? I said, what? He says, you have a blood cancer.
Recht was diagnosed with myeloma. Myeloma is the second most common blood cancer after non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. About 20,000 Americans are stricken with the disease every year.
The special feature of myeloma is that it stays in the bone or the bone marrow. So myeloma, it's a bone marrow tumor. So it's a bone marrow tumor, and it grows like a lump in the bone marrow. And so it increases in size, and so it can damage the bones around it. And so it can damage your spine. It can cause a lot of pain and disability, bone fractures. And so this is a very disabling disease.
It wasn't that long ago that a person with myeloma had only one treatment option. First, an infusion of chemotherapy, then a bone marrow transplant in one of these rooms.
But within the last decade, some drugs like Revlimid, Velcade, and Thalamid have emerged as frontline treatments. These medications have helped myeloma patients live longer, but they're not a cure, and they don't suppress the disease forever.
Well, the Revlimid, after about 4 years, within the last year, has started to fail a little bit. The myeloma is starting to increase a little bit.
That's why the search is on at Moore's UCSD Cancer Center for better treatments for myeloma. Dr. Catriona Jameson says the reason people die from cancer is they relapse. She believes the key to myeloma is getting a better understanding of what happens inside bone marrow.
So if we can understand the interplay between the myeloma cancer stem cell and its environment, then we'll be able to devise better strategies. They're likely to be combination strategies that will be able to eradicate those cells that we think are at the root cause of relapse.
Researchers at UC San Diego are also involved in clinical trials of potential myeloma therapies. Hematologist Erin Reed is the principal investigator for 3 of the trials. She says the current regimen of drugs is good, but
we don't have a cure. We have so much room for improvement without a cure. We need to find something that is going to get rid of the disease forever.
Elliot Recht heads up a myeloma patient support group. Over the years, he's seen a lot of people die from the disease. But Recht says he's lived a lot longer than anyone expected.
When I was diagnosed, it was 3-year life expectancy, and that's what I was told. I attribute it to good luck.
That story by KPBS health reporter Kenny Goldberg. About 10,000 Americans die from myeloma every year. An event or politics or even a single person can influence language. We're back at the roundtable now with a look at how ordinary words took on extraordinary meaning in 2011.
Occupying, 99%ers, and Humblebrag. 3 words we can add to the lexicon thanks to 2011. My next guest is Grant Barrett, co-host of the nationally syndicated show Away with Words. Grant also authored the New York Times list of 2011 words. Grant, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
So you compiled a list of words from the year 2011. Are these new words or are these words that have new meaning?
They're not new words, and they don't necessarily have new meaning, but they are newly prominent, very much in the same way that Time magazine has a Person of the Year. These are words that weren't born this year, but we're all talking about them. They're part of the discourse. They're related to the things that were happening and what was on our minds and the stuff that was in our newspaper and on our radio stations.
So we want to talk about some of the words that made it on your list. Let's start with occupy and occupying.
I think that will be the big year. That will be the big word of the year. 2011 was the year that Occupy started. It came out of Canada, actually. An organization called Adbusters decided in July to write about a protest that they thought should take place in October, and they called it the Occupy Wall Street movement. And of course, when you've got that word and there's a place name after it, other place names can follow. So it can be Occupy San Diego, or Occupy California, or Occupy Sesame Street. Of course, the jokes started coming rather quickly.
It's actually a brilliant word for the protest, isn't it?
It is. For one reason that I like from a linguistic point of view is that it avoids the problem with the connotations of occupiers or occupation. That always suggests this outside dominant force that has a lot of political power, but we're not talking about those people. This movement was by the people who felt shorted or slighted by the financial structure or the power structure of America, so they don't use those words. They don't call themselves occupiers. They're OWSs, Occupy Wall Streeters, or that sort of thing, but they don't call themselves occupiers or an occupation.
So out of Occupy, we got the term 99%ers. Tell us about that.
This is a figurative term. It's not a literal term. And figuratively, the 99% are those people who are shortchanged by the system. They don't have the money that the 1% have. They don't have the power that the 1% have. They don't have the opportunities that the 1% have. And in particular, the 99%ers are those people who believe that they are following all the rules. They obey the law, they pay their taxes, they went to school, they got a university degree, they are respectful and kind and do all the things that we're supposed to do in America to be good citizens. And yet the opportunities haven't been there. Somehow, somewhere along the way, they feel like those opportunities were automatically shunted to the people with power and money.
So next on our list, actually 2 words, Arab Spring.
Arab Spring is kind of the international version of the Occupy movement, and they reflect each other in a way. The Arab Spring is about all of these North African and Middle Eastern countries that have had movements, revolutions, battles. Some of them were simply protests in the street. Some of them involved overturning of governments and the deaths of leaders. It's kind of a misnomer, though, because they're not all Arabs. They might be Muslim, they might speak Arabic or a version of it, but they're not necessarily Arabs. So it's a really great term. This one is one, I think, for the history books. It's not just going to be for 2011. I think Arab Spring will be up there alongside Velvet Revolution.
Now, one completely different that really doesn't mean anything as it sounds, bath salts.
Bath salts, this was a euphemistic term for some drugs that were kind of manufactured in a lab, and then you could buy them at, say, truck stops and kind of just, a variety of places. And they skirted the law for a while because they weren't specifically named as illegal. And because they were called the bath salts on the label, you just kind of had to know what they really were for. And they were for taking for recreational purposes. And they've since been named in state and federal laws as illegal.
Now, this next on our list, I didn't know this word, although I should because I believe it comes from my son's favorite show, Humblebrag.
Yeah, Humblebrag. Humblebrag is started as a Twitter phenomenon. This is where somebody says something that purports to be a complaint about how terrible their life is. And yet in that complaint is some kind of evidence that they lead a charmed life. They have the kind of life that you and I don't. Like somebody who, Arianna Huffington said something along the lines of, oh, here I am in Dubai and none of my 3 cell phones is working. Or somebody might say, oh,
yes,
somebody might say, oh, I got to go on TV again. It's so terrible, right?
Yeah.
That's a humble brag.
Where did it come from?
Harris Whittles, I believe, who was a writer for a television show.
Parks and Rec.
Parks
yes,
and Rec.
my
That's
son's
right.
show.
And
Yes, yes.
Yeah, he's a very young fellow, and he started this Twitter feed. And what he does, and other people do now, is they find these Humblebrags and they point them out and kind of retweet them with the Humblebrag hashtag, so that you know that this person. And it's true, it exists. There's a certain kind of false humility in there that's kind of it's hypocritical in a way. Point it out.
Well, you've got a great list put together. Where can our audience see the other words on this list?
You can, of course, find them at the New York Times. Just search for my name, Grant Barrett, or you can find them linked on my website at grantbarrett.com.
Great. Thanks, Grant, for being here.
My pleasure.
The Public Square is up next. This is KPBS Evening Edition.
I'm Gwen Eiffel on the next News Hour. Iowans cast the first ballots of this election year. That's Tuesday on the PBS News Hour.
In the last year, KPBS News has been honored with nearly 36 awards. I'm extremely proud of these honors, and I thank you for your support as we continue to serve our local communities with award-winning news coverage in the years to come.
The world was in a dream before the war, but now it's woken up and said goodbye to it.
Tell him what's in your heart.
Dear Lord, I beg you to keep him safe.
Welcome back to the Public Square on KPBS Evening Edition. Some big news, whether you're a sports fan or not. As we told you earlier, San Diego Chargers president Dean Spanos announced he'll keep coach Norv Turner and general manager A.J. Smith. Well, what do you think of this decision? Do you think keeping Turner and Smith will have an impact on whether San Diego will support a new stadium for the Chargers? Or will fans and taxpayers turn on the team? Write to me at jfarian@kpbs.org, or you can follow us on Twitter, or of course like us on Facebook. Now let's go back to the news desk where Peggy has a recap of the other top stories.
Someone tried to set a San Diego worship hall on fire early this morning. It's the third time it's happened in 2 weeks. Fire officials say a man wearing a mask was seen running from the Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses this morning. And a federal judge has blocked the state from cutting Medi-Cal payments to pharmacists and hospitals. State lawmakers said they plan to appeal the ruling. A high surf advisory began this morning and will last through tomorrow afternoon for San Diego County. The National Weather Service expects breakers of up to 10 feet. The high surf may cause minor flooding of low-lying areas and erosion, especially during high tide. You can watch and comment on any of the stories you saw tonight on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thank you for joining us. Have a great evening, and we'll leave you with a look at our forecast.